Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. So, today I want to go over something that's kind of interesting, the U.S. women's soccer team. It's something we haven't talked about since about 2019, 2 years ago. And there's been some new news that's brought the story back to life. And we want to talk about that with you. Now, if this is the first time that you've seen the program, we do long-form political commentary. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. As long as the internet overlords allow, we reach out to you across the world to hear from you in text and in calls, talking about the issues that matter because we believe in free speech. So we hope that you will join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in that expression of free speech. But let's talk about what's going on today. U.S. women's soccer. It's not really a big deal. It's not a subject that a lot of people talk about. It's not something that really brings in a whole lot of interest. But there have been moments where it has been the topic in the United States. And it seems that it may again be a bigger topic of discussion. So why is that? What's going on? So let me explain. Back in July of 2019, the U.S. women's soccer team won the Women's World Cup. It was the second time that they had done so. It was the second time in a row, and they led the world. This is great because women's soccer was created by the United States to do exactly that, to dominate, to win, to show that the United States can win in soccer. That's a fact. And we can't do it in the men's competition, and we never have done it in the men's competition. But women, where most nations don't even have a women's team, a professional or even amateur women's team, that was an arena that the United States could excel at. And we did. And in 2019, the second win in a row, the U.S. women secured their position as number one in the world, which was fantastic. Except it was the celebration of the win that actually garnered more attention than actually the win itself. In fact, when we were talking about it, which was in this article which we did U.S. women's soccer disrespect the flag? Yes. See for yourself. And we detail the 18 seconds of video that was available that showed Megan Rapinoe, the woman in purple hair in the center here, who is the captain of the U.S. women's team, as she helped to disrespect the flag, dragging it on the ground and potentially stomping on that flag. Now, many people may have a question about this. We go over it in detail. That entire 18 seconds, almost frame by frame, showing that this was done on purpose. Megan Rapinoe didn't care about the U.S. flag. Many of her teammates didn't care about the U.S. flag. They let it fall to the ground and may or may not have stepped on it intentionally. That's a fact. We've covered it. Over 10,000 people have watched and seen that. But now it's 2021, and we've been seeing a resurgence of an interest and comments on that very video. And we had to wonder why. Why suddenly? It's not new. We've been doing this for 10 years now, and we've had many videos that become more or less popular depending on what's going on in the world at any given time and any given subject or subject matter. But why the U.S. women's soccer? A subject that really hasn't been in anyone's mind since 2019. So we decided to look into it. And the first thing we found out is, well, there is a women's soccer month. And that this was the third iteration of the women's soccer team. It took the United States 3 separate tries to create a U.S. women's soccer team and an international women's soccer competition. And as it so turns out, March is Women's Soccer Month, something that probably a lot of people didn't know. In fact, we didn't know it. No one did. Although this article came out just yesterday. Women's Soccer History Month, Day 13. Dare to Dream captures the spirit and success of U.S. Women's National Tournament 2005. One of the earlier iterations of the attempt to create a world women's soccer competition. Well, that's great, except this story happens to be a reprint. It's a reprint from December of 2005 by Michael Lewis. So, really, no one knew that it's Women's Soccer History Month. It wasn't a subject of real interest. No one's really cared. No one's paid attention. And it's such an old issue that they have to reprint stories from 2005 in 2021, 16 years later. It's not really a big subject. So again, we were left with the question, why is it this third iteration of a U.S. national team for soccer, why is it getting attention? Why is that story coming back into the media? And we had to think, well, did it have anything to do with the fact that in July 12th, in celebration of the U.S. women's team's win, Megan Rapinoe was very clear, along with a few other members of her team, to completely not only disrespect the flag initially, but to follow up that disrespect with a lack of even saying the Pledge of Allegiance for a nation that gave her the opportunity to have more success, more fame, and more money than she could have possibly have imagined in any other nation. There is no other nation in the world that she would have done as well. So you have to wonder, she won't sing the national anthem. She won't put her hand over her heart. She doesn't believe in America because of politics. And you have to say, well, yeah, that's kind of relevant. We see a lot of people doing that with BLM and Antifa over 2020. We see a lot of people who are complaining now that America isn't perfect, that it isn't perfectly the way they want it to be, particularly from the Democratic Socialists and the progressives that are in politics and in the nation. But yet, that doesn't separate the women's national soccer team. Why is that story suddenly getting so much more attention? It really caught our attention. We had to wonder, why? Did something happen with Megan Rapinoe? Did something happen with the soccer team? What about their lawsuit? Now, this is something that's interesting. Back in 2019, the U.S. women's soccer team sued to get more pay. They wanted more money. Their thing was that they bring in a profit and they should get paid as well as the men's national soccer team because they deserve it. And even more so after the fact that they had won the second Women's World Cup, even though this was the third iteration of this attempt to make them into a true bona fide sport on an international level. Well, that actually was resolved. The question of women's pay, of the U.S. women's soccer team pay, that was resolved May 4th of 2020. And they lost. They lost because, in fact, they actually get paid more than the men do on a per game and a cumulative level. You see, the U.S. men's team, they get paid based on performance, both in terms of the audience, the attention on national media, and whether or not their team wins and how far their team gets in the international world soccer rankings. Women's soccer didn't do that, though. They don't get paid on that same basis. They actually had the chance to get paid based on that basis, and they turned it down. They said no, they don't want that option. They wanted a guarantee pay, regardless of whether anyone showed up, whether anyone paid attention or not, because This was the third try. No one had shown up before. No one cared before. So they wanted to make sure they got paid for the performance that they made. Fair enough. But then they argued after the fact, after people actually paid attention, after their league made it to 2 seasons, which no other league, the other 2 iterations beforehand, had ever reached that point. Now that they actually had some international fame, some recognition, somewhat of a following, now they wanted more pay. So they sued. And the judge, which happened to be Judge Gary Klausner of the Federal District Court of Los Angeles, pointed out that the women's team actually had earned more, quote, on both a cumulative and an average per game basis, end quote, than the men's team during the time of the lawsuit. And he also went on to highlight the fact that the women's team had the chance to get more pay based on performance, but that was the risk that they would have to take. Because if they didn't have better performance, if they didn't make more money and get more attention, they would get paid less. They had that option. They didn't take it. And so they lost their lawsuit. They claimed that they wanted to, of course, go back and they wanted to get it reviewed by a higher court. And that may, in fact, be going on right now. But the fact is, they had their day in court. They lost. So women's soccer at that point, in May of 2020, had come. They had created the 3rd iteration. It gained some success. They had 2 seasons. They had gotten 2 World Cups for the U.S. national team. They took that moment of adoration around the world and stepped on the United States flag, dragged it in the ground. Mind you, not every player, Kelly O'Hara, rescued the flag and supported our nation. But Megan Rapinoe and others didn't care. It was about their moment. It was about their time to shine in the sun, and anyone else be damned, including the nation that gave them that opportunity. And then that led to them losing their court case because they were more risk adverse than the men's team. They weren't confident in women's soccer. They weren't confident in their own abilities, so they didn't risk getting paid more for having more people pay attention. Seems pretty straightforward. So we had to ask the question, was it the fact that maybe the court case is back? Maybe they had another argument that said, well, even though they signed a contract, even though they had the opportunity to get paid more based on their performance, that there was some other loophole in that this would bring it back into the courts and they had another shot at getting paid more money. Maybe that's why people were paying attention. No, that wasn't why people were paying attention. In fact, the only thing we could find is we found out that on February 24th, there was news. WABC was covering this. KRCR out of Redding, California, covered the women's national soccer team. Something that the rest of the media really didn't care about and didn't cover, and most of the people in America probably missed. But they were back. They were in the news. Rapinoe and U.S. women's soccer team stop kneeling and start standing for the anthem. There's the big news. February 24th, they're standing for the U.S. anthem after stepping on the United States flag, after dragging the U.S. flag into the dirt while the entire world was watching them, after failing to pledge allegiance, after failing to sing the national anthem. Megan Rapinoe stood up for the nation that gave her the ability to live a quality of life higher than most people in the entire world for playing a game. That surely was the reason that caught the attention. The fact that they decided as a team that they had finally moved past kneeling and had finally made the decision that as a team, they were going to stand up for the United States, stand up for the national anthem, and to move their league, the entire World League, quite literally, to move it forward, to go on beyond that moment. Obviously, that must be something that caught the attention. That must be the reason why everyone was paying attention. Except, quite honestly, it really wasn't. Even though some of the members were still wearing Black Lives Matter jackets, even though earlier in the 2021, there were still some women who were kneeling and were disrespecting the flag, the fact is, no one really cared. The moment had passed. It was already past 2019, and no one really cared what the women were doing or what was going on in the women's team. In fact, their big lead, the big name, Megan Rapinoe, who was responsible for the flag being dragged at the time of the women's international win, the woman who would not pledge allegiance, would not sing the national anthem, even she had suffered by not being able to play in 2020 and gaining zero attention across the world. No one cared what she was doing or what was going on. So even she decided, for the good of the national team and to regain some of the positive attention, she was going to stand just like the rest of the members of the U.S. national team. For all of that, no one cared. No one cared that she got in her games earlier this year. She scored 3 goals, and that she's done very well as an athlete, and no one cared. No one covered it in the news. It didn't make national media. It's not important because women's soccer isn't important in America. In fact, it's not important in the world, quite honestly, especially if we're comparing it to FIFA and men's world soccer, which we have seen going on for decades upon decades, and is the single most popular sporting event in the world every 4 years, along with the Olympics. No, the one thing that seems to be why people have been introducing themselves to our initial article back in July 9th of 2019 about the disrespect to the United States flag, the story that's been catching their attention, the reason why they're paying attention to it is because now there's going to be a movie. That's it. There's a movie about Megan Rapinoe, the woman with purple hair who disrespected the United States flag to try and suck all of the attention for herself, something that many would consider to be conceited, as we do. No, it's because they're getting a movie from HBO Max talking about their fight for equal pay, because they're still upset that they lost their court case for getting equal pay, even though they get paid more. Even though they had the chance to get paid more than they did, and they said no, they don't want it. That their contract said, we're not going to do that. So they're going to be going, and the U.S. women's national soccer team is speaking out about their, quote, ongoing fight for equal pay, end quote, in an upcoming documentary by HBO Max. And this teaser trailer that premiered on March 8th is the thing that caught people's attention. Called LFG, which stands for Let's Effing Go. It's a story about women getting equal pay, even though they got more than equal pay, even though they turned down the contract that could have paid them even more. And I wonder if HBO Max will point out they had that opportunity, they turned it down. And once they actually gained some success, Well, then sour grapes came in and they said, no, we want more. Or you can call it greed. They want more money after the fact, when everyone was taking the risk on the third try at a U.S. and international women's soccer league. So you have to wonder, gee, is that what it takes to get attention? That in the 2 years between July 9th of 2019 and March 8th, no one cared. They lost their case. They fell to the wayside. They brought nothing to America. They added nothing. Now, I think in big part, that's because they were dragging the United States flag across the ground. They were, we believe, stepping on it. And as we show in the video about it, it's very likely they were stepping on the United States flag so that they could celebrate themselves, that they could have that individual moment, not a national pride, but their own self-centered adoration. Well, that doesn't really bode well. That doesn't gain a loyal following for the most part. That doesn't endear people to that league, to that industry, to those players. And maybe that's why we see now, as of February, that the players are now standing for America, having learned that for the NFL, kneeling hasn't worked, that for the NBA, kneeling hasn't worked, that denouncing America and destroying a country that has given them an opportunity as athletes that no other country in the world truly can ever match, that people really don't want to be involved with that it's not interesting. And so, as a result, we've been getting a lot more attention from people all over who are suddenly realizing, hey, this U.S. women's team, this team that's been talking about equal pay, that they, it's women's rights. They have to get paid more. They were so oppressed that they turned down the opportunity to get paid more, that they disrespected the very nation that gave them the opportunity to become famous in the first place. People are finding out about that story and they've been getting a lot of attention. And so we're seeing that story grow and people get more attention to it. And I look forward to seeing, well, let me rephrase that. We're not going to watch the HBO Max movie. We don't care about the documentary on the U.S. Women's World Soccer team. They're not that interesting. We're not interested in a story that's already been resolved. They didn't get the pay because they weren't willing to take the risk. They didn't believe in their sport or their abilities enough to take the risk to get the extra pay. It's an uninteresting story. Maybe HBO Max will get this to be a more interesting story. Perhaps they will spin the story, leaving out some of the key details. That's something that we think is probably going to happen, given that Disney is so well connected to HBO, and given that Disney is a very, very woke company. Will people pay attention to women's soccer in 2022? Will anyone care if women dominate yet again? The U.S. women will dominate once again in a league that most of the world isn't participating in, that most of the world doesn't care about. Will that be the thing that gets everyone's attention? Maybe. Probably not. I think there was a moment, call it lightning in a bottle, and it struck in 2019. And perhaps it had the opportunity to spread even further. But when we saw Megan Rapinoe and the other members, many of the other members of the women's team, just destroy the U.S. flag, to step on the nation that raised them up so high, I think they did irreparable damage to themselves. And that story, as much as they hope that they have moved past it, will never be something that won't be part of their history. Yes, March is Women's Soccer History Month, and that's a great thing. And I hope every woman and little girl that's interested in soccer, that has the ability and trains really hard, will be able to have the opportunity to play on an international playing field and to do their very best. But this will never get the same kind of attention, I don't believe. It'll never garner the same kind of heartfelt feelings from Americans across the globe. I think they made their point. They don't believe in America. And therefore, why should America believe in them? But this is our point of view. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you believe there's another reason why we should pay attention to the U.S. women's soccer team. Maybe you believe there's something more going on with this story than what we've noticed. We'd love to hear what you have to say, because we believe in free speech. And we look forward to hearing from you, not only on the comments of this video, but also every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, if you found this to be interesting, informative, please like and share. And most of all, please do subscribe, because that helps to spread the word and to have more people add their voices to this expression of free speech. We thank you, and we hope that you're going to have a great day